The sound of gunfire cracked through the dawn air as Nora Mitchell clutched her baby boy to her chest, tears streaming down her face while her husband's blood pooled beneath the floorboards of their small homestead. Just yesterday, Thomas had kissed her goodbye before heading to town for supplies, only to return home pursued by bandits who'd accused him of cheating at cards. They'd shot him dead on their porch before riding away, leaving Nora alone with 6-month-old Caleb in a remote corner of Arizona Territory. 1878. 3 days later, Nora stood beside the crude wooden cross marking her husband's grave. Her hands trembled as she held Caleb, who fussed against her shoulder. The baby hadn't spoken his first word, yet Thomas had been so certain it would be Papa. Now he would never hear it. "Madam, you all right out here?" Nora turned, startled by the deep voice that broke through her grief. A tall man on horseback approached, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "I'm fine," she lied, wiping tears away with her free hand. "Just saying goodbye." The stranger removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and kind blue eyes. "Name's Blake Hollister. I'm sorry for your trouble. Word travels fast, even out here." Nora nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Caleb whimpered against her shoulder. "That's a fine boy you got there," Blake said softly. "How old?" 6 months, Nora managed. "His name is Caleb." Blake stepped closer, his boots crunching on the dry ground. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't mean to intrude, but I heard what happened. It ain't safe for a woman and child alone out here." "Have you got family nearby?" Nora shook her head. "My parents are back east. Thomas was all I had here." "What will you do?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. What could she do? The homestead was miles from town, the land still barely tamed. Winter was coming. She had some money saved, but not enough to get back east. "I don't know," she admitted. Blake's eyes moved from her face to the baby and back again. He seemed to be weighing something heavy in his mind. "I've got a ranch about 10 miles west," he said finally. "Nothing fancy, but it's safe. I need help with cooking and such. You and the boy could stay there while you figure things out." Nora stiffened. "I don't need charity, Mr. Hollister." "It ain't charity if you're working, madam, and I ain't offering anything improper. There's a separate cabin for you and the little one. He paused, looking genuinely troubled. "It ain't right what happened to your husband, and it ain't right to leave you out here alone." Caleb began to cry in earnest now, his tiny face reddening. Nora bounced him gently, her mind racing. "What choice did she have?" "I'll think about it," she said. Blake nodded, replacing his hat. "I'll come back tomorrow. If you're of a mind to accept, I'll help you pack what you need." As he mounted his horse, he looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That boy there," he said, nodding toward Caleb. "He deserves a chance." "So do you, Mrs. Mitchell." Then he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Nora standing between her husband's grave and an uncertain future. That night, Nora barely slept. Every sound, the wind through the cottonwoods, the distant howl of coyotes, made her start with fear. She kept Thomas's old rifle beside her bed, though she'd only fired it a handful of times. Caleb slept fitfully, as if sensing her anxiety. By morning, her decision was made. When Blake Hollister returned as promised, she met him on the porch with a small trunk packed and Caleb bundled against the morning chill. "We accept your offer, Mr. Hollister," she said formally. "But I want to be clear, this is temporary, until I can make other arrangements." Blake nodded, his expression serious. "Of course, madam. I'll hitch up my wagon for your things." As he loaded her trunk, Nora took one last look at the homestead she and Thomas had built with such hope. They'd arrived from Philadelphia just a year ago, full of dreams about their new life in the West. Now those dreams lay buried alongside her husband. The journey to Blake's ranch took most of the day. He didn't speak much, seeming to understand her need for silence. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or name the distant mountains. Caleb, surprisingly, seemed content in the wagon, watching the changing landscape with wide, curious eyes. When they finally arrived, Nora was taken aback. She'd expected something crude and primitive, but Blake's ranch was substantial, a main house built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and a small but well-kept cabin that he indicated would be hers. "It ain't much," he said, misreading her surprise, "but it's dry and warm." "It's more than I expected," she admitted. "You've done well for yourself, Mr. Hollister." A shadow passed over his face. "Had help getting started. My brother and I built most of it together." He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone warned against asking more. The cabin was simple but clean, with a small stove, a bed, a cradle, and basic furnishings. Blake showed her where everything was, then excused himself to tend to his horses. "Supper's at sundown," he said from the doorway. "Take your time settling in. There's no rush for you to start working." Left alone, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, Caleb in her arms, and finally let herself cry for Thomas, for herself, for the future that had been stolen from them. Caleb reached up and patted her wet cheek with his tiny hand, and she pulled him closer, drawing strength from his warmth. "We'll be all right," she whispered against his downy head. "Somehow, we'll be all right." The first weeks at Blake's ranch passed in a blur of adjustment and grief. Blake proved to be a considerate employer, giving Nora space while ensuring she had everything she needed. He rarely came to the cabin, instead waiting for her to bring meals to the main house. He never asked personal questions, though she often caught him watching Caleb with a gentle expression that softened his weathered features. Nora learned that Blake ran the ranch mostly alone, with occasional help from a Mexican cowhand named Miguel who lived in town. There had once been more men, Blake explained briefly, but bad years had forced him to scale back. "What about your brother?" Nora asked one evening as she cleared away supper dishes. Blake's face tightened. "Daniel died 3 years ago, raid on a cattle drive." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. Blake nodded, then changed the subject. "The boy's growing well, seems happy." It was true. Despite everything, Caleb was thriving in their new surroundings. He'd started trying to crawl, pushing himself backward across the cabin floor in determined if unproductive efforts that made Nora smile despite her sadness. As October turned to November, the nights grew colder. Blake brought extra firewood to Nora's cabin each evening, often staying to bounce Caleb on his knee while Nora prepared for bed. Slowly, she began to learn more about the quiet rancher. He'd come west from Missouri after the war, where he'd fought for the Union. He'd never married, devoting himself instead to building the ranch with his brother. He read voraciously. His shelves were filled with books ranging from practical manuals to poetry. "My mother was a school teacher," he explained when Nora expressed surprise at his literary collection. "She made sure Daniel and I appreciated learning, even way out here." One bitterly cold night in early December, Nora woke to Caleb's distressed cries. When she lifted him from his cradle, she realized with alarm that he was burning with fever. She tried everything she knew, cool cloths, sips of water, but nothing helped. By dawn, she was frantic. Without thinking, she wrapped Caleb in blankets and ran to the main house, pounding on Blake's door. He appeared immediately, as if he hadn't been sleeping. "He's sick," Nora gasped. "I don't know what to do." Blake took the bundle from her arms, laying a large, gentle hand on Caleb's forehead. His expression grew serious. "He needs a doctor. The nearest one's in Silver Creek, 20 miles south." "Please," Nora whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't lose him too." Blake nodded once. I'll saddle my fastest horse. We'll go together." The ride to Silver Creek was a nightmare Nora would never forget. She sat before Blake on his horse, Caleb clutched to her chest, while Blake pushed the animal to its limits. The winter sun rose cold and clear as they rode, but Nora barely noticed the landscape flying past. All her attention was focused on her son's labored breathing. The town's doctor, an elderly man named Wilkins, examined Caleb with careful hands and concerned eyes. "Lung fever," he pronounced. "Bad, but not hopeless. He's young and strong." He mixed medicines and gave Nora detailed instructions. They would need to stay in town for at least a night, maybe longer, to see if Caleb improved. Blake arranged rooms at the local hotel without hesitation. "Whatever it costs," he told the proprietor. "Whatever they need." That night, as Nora sat beside the hotel bed where Caleb lay restlessly sleeping, Blake brought her food she couldn't eat and coffee she drank gratefully. "You should rest," he told her. "I'll watch him." "I can't sleep," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and worry. "Then I'll sit with you." And he did, hour after hour, sometimes speaking softly of inconsequential things to distract her, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. Toward dawn, when Caleb's fever finally broke and he fell into a peaceful sleep, Nora found herself leaning against Blake's solid shoulder, her own eyes closing at last. She woke with a start to find herself lying on the bed beside Caleb, covered with Blake's coat. Blake himself sat in a chair by the window, watching the street below. "You moved me," she said, disoriented. "You were about to fall over," he replied simply. "The boy's better. Doctor came by while you were sleeping, said the fever's gone." Relief washed over Nora in a wave so powerful she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Blake looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious. "Seeing that boy healthy is payment enough," he said finally. Then, more hesitantly, "I meant what I said to you that day at your husband's grave, Mrs. Mitchell. That boy deserves a chance at life. I'd be honored to help give him that." There was something in his voice that made Nora look at him more closely. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about us?" Blake turned back to the window. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he said quietly. "And because sometimes a man needs a purpose beyond himself." They returned to the ranch the next day, Caleb much improved and sleeping peacefully against Nora's chest for most of the journey. Blake rode more slowly this time, careful not to jostle them. As the weeks passed and Christmas approached, Nora began to notice subtle changes in their arrangement. Blake started taking meals with her and Caleb in her cabin, rather than in the main house. He brought small gifts, a carved wooden horse for Caleb, a length of pretty blue fabric for Nora that he'd purchased in town. He spent evenings reading aloud while she sewed or mended, his deep voice filling the small space with stories of far-off places and grand adventures. On Christmas Eve, Blake appeared at her door with his arms full of pine boughs and berries. "Thought the place could use some decorating," he said, looking almost shy. "For the boys' first Christmas." Together, they transformed the cabin, filling it with greenery and the sweet scent of pine. Blake had even found a small fir tree, which they set up in the corner and decorated with paper stars Nora cut from old newspapers. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Blake presented Nora with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It isn't much," he said, watching nervously as she unwrapped it. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When Nora opened it, she found it empty. "I thought," Blake said hesitantly, "maybe someday you might want to put the boy's picture in it, or—" He trailed off, color rising in his face. "It's beautiful," Nora said, genuinely touched. "Thank you. I'm afraid I don't have anything for you. You've given me more than you know." Blake replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Having you and Caleb here, it's made this place feel like a home again." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings. Then Caleb stirred in his cradle, breaking the spell. Blake stood. "I should go. Early start tomorrow, even if it is Christmas." At the door, he paused. "Nora," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I know you said this arrangement was temporary, and I respect that, but I want you to know. You and the boy are welcome here for as long as you want to stay." After he left, Nora sat by the fire for a long time, the silver locket cool in her palm. She thought about Thomas, about the life they'd planned together. She thought about Blake with his quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. And she thought about Caleb, who deserved a future filled with love and security. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she'd expected, one where she and Caleb weren't alone. January brought heavy snow and temperatures so cold that Blake insisted Nora and Caleb move into the main house, where the larger fireplace kept the rooms warmer. He moved into his brother's old room, giving Nora his larger bedroom. Living under the same roof brought a new intimacy to their relationship. Nora learned that Blake sang softly to himself while he shaved in the mornings. Blake discovered that Nora had a talent for drawing and encouraged her to use his paper and pencils. They developed routines, Blake bringing in firewood while Nora prepared breakfast, shared meals at the big oak table, evenings spent reading or talking while Caleb played on a blanket before the fire. One evening in late January, as a blizzard howled outside, Caleb pulled himself up on Blake's knee and looked directly into the man's face. "Bah," he said clearly. "Bah, bah." Blake froze, his eyes wide with wonder and something deeper. Did he just? "Bah." Caleb repeated triumphantly, patting Blake's cheek with his tiny hand. "His first word," Nora whispered, her heart twisting with complicated emotions. "Thomas should have been here for this." But he wasn't, and Blake was, and the look on Blake's face, a mixture of awe, joy, and heartbreaking tenderness, made her throat tighten. "Hey there, little man," Blake said softly, his voice unsteady. "That's right. Blake, can you say it again?" "Bah." Caleb grabbed Blake's beard and giggled. Blake looked up at Nora, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know this should have been his father's moment." Nora shook her head, her own eyes filling. "Thomas would be grateful that Caleb has someone who cares for him so much," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. That night, after Caleb was asleep in his cradle beside her bed, Nora lay awake listening to the storm and thinking about the moment when Blake had called himself Caleb's friend. It was true that Blake had become important to both of them, but Nora was beginning to realize that her feelings for the quiet rancher ran deeper than friendship or gratitude. The realization frightened her. It had been less than 4 months since Thomas died. Was it disloyal to feel this way so soon? And even if it wasn't, did Blake feel the same? He clearly cared for Caleb, but his kindness to Nora might simply be part of his honorable nature. February brought warmer weather and the first hints of spring. Blake became busy with ranch work, preparing for calving season. Nora took over more household duties, making the main house truly livable for the first time since Blake's brother had died. One afternoon, while Blake was out checking fence lines, Nora went into the storage room looking for fabric to make curtains. In a trunk pushed against the wall, she found a small leather-bound journal. It fell open as she lifted it, revealing Blake's neat handwriting. She knew she should close it immediately. It was private, not meant for her eyes. But a sentence caught her attention. "Saw Mrs. Mitchell and her baby at the cemetery today. Something about her grief touched me deeply." It was dated the day they'd met. Nora hesitated only a moment before continuing to read. The journal entries were brief but revealing. Blake had written about his initial offer of help, his concerns about propriety, his growing attachment to Caleb, and increasingly, his feelings for Nora herself. "She smiled today, truly smiled for the first time since I've known her," read one entry from December. "It transformed her face. I find myself wanting to make her smile again, though I know her heart belongs to her husband's memory." And more recently, "The boy called me ba today, his first word. I've never felt such pride or such sorrow simultaneously. I am not his father and never will be, but in my heart, I love him as if he were my own, just as I have come to love his mother, though I can never tell her so." Nora closed the journal with trembling hands and returned it to the trunk. Her heart pounded as she processed what she'd read. Blake loved them, both of them. He had been carrying these feelings in silence, believing she was still too devoted to Thomas's memory to consider another attachment. And wasn't she? Nora sat on the edge of her bed, thoughts whirling. She would always love Thomas, always honor what they had shared. But the truth was, life continued. Caleb needed a father, and she needed Blake with his quiet strength and unexpected tenderness. She had fallen in love with him so gradually she hadn't recognized it until now. The sound of hoofbeats outside alerted her to Blake's return. She composed herself, smoothing her hair and straightening her apron before going to meet him. Blake was unsaddling his horse in the barn when she found him. He looked up with a smile that warmed his eyes. "Everything all right?" "You look flushed." "I need to talk to you," Nora said, gathering her courage. "About our arrangement." Blake's smile faded. He turned back to his horse, his shoulders tense. "You're wanting to leave," he said flatly. "I understand. Spring's coming. Travel will be easier." "No," Nora said quickly. "That's not it at all." Blake paused, his hands still on the saddle. "Then what is it?" Nora took a deep breath. "When you offered us a place here, you said it was temporary, until I could make other arrangements. I remember." Blake still wouldn't look at her. "I've been thinking about those other arrangements," Nora continued, her heart pounding. "And I've realized something. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here, with you." Blake turned slowly, his expression guarded. "What are you saying, Nora?" "I'm saying that Caleb and I belong here now. If you still want us." Blake's eyes searched her face. "I want you to be sure," he said carefully. "I don't want your gratitude, Nora, or your sense of obligation." "It's not gratitude," Nora said softly. "And it's not obligation, it's love, Blake. I love you." For a moment, Blake didn't move. Then he crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and gathered her into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Nora responded, her arms circling his neck. When they finally broke apart, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I've loved you since the first day," he confessed. "You and Caleb both, I just never thought." "I know," Nora said. "I read your journal. I'm sorry it fell open and I saw my name." Blake laughed softly. "Caught by my own words." "Beautiful words," Nora assured him. "Is it true, what you wrote about Caleb?" "Every word," Blake said seriously. "I love that boy as if he were my own son. I know I can never replace his father." "You're not replacing Thomas," Nora interrupted. "You're giving Caleb something different but just as important. A future. A father who will see him grow up, who will teach him and guide him." Blake's eyes filled with emotion. "I promise you, Nora, I will be the best father I can be to him, and the best husband to you if you'll have me." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Hollister?" Nora asked, smiling through tears. Blake dropped to one knee right there in the barn, hay sticking to his jeans. "Nora Mitchell, will you marry me? Will you let me be Caleb's father and your husband? Will you make this ranch a home with me?" "Yes," Nora whispered. "Yes to all of it." They were married in April when the wildflowers carpeted the hills around the ranch. It was a small ceremony, performed by the circuit preacher with only a few neighbors as witnesses. Caleb, now 10 months old, sat on Miguel's knee, babbling happily. Nora wore a simple white dress she'd made from fabric Blake had brought from town. Blake wore his best shirt and a new pair of boots. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Blake kissed her with such tenderness that several of the neighboring women dabbed at their eyes. That evening, after their guests had gone and Caleb was asleep in his new room in the main house, Blake led Nora onto the porch. The spring air was cool but not cold, scented with sage and new grass. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package. Inside, Nora found a tiny daguerreotype of Caleb, sized perfectly to fit in the silver locket Blake had given her at Christmas. "How did you manage this?" she asked, delighted. "Photographer came through Silver Creek last week. I took Caleb there while you were visiting with Mrs. Henderson." Blake helped her place the tiny image in the locket. "There's room for another on the other side, maybe someday." He trailed off, but Nora understood. "Maybe someday we'll add to our family," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'd like that." Blake pulled her close. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "After Daniel died, I figured I'd live out my days alone here, just me and the cattle and the memories. And now I have everything," Blake said simply. "A wife I adore, a son to raise, a future to build." As they stood together under the vast western sky, Nora felt the last lingering shadow of grief lift from her heart. She would always remember Thomas and honor his memory. But life had given her a second chance at happiness, and she intended to embrace it fully. "I'll be his first word and his forever father," Blake had promised about Caleb. And watching them together in the weeks and months that followed, Nora knew it was a promise he would keep. Summer came to the ranch in a blaze of heat and activity. Blake, with Miguel's help, branded calves and repaired fences damaged by spring floods. Nora planted a vegetable garden beside the house and taught Caleb to toddle after her as she worked, his little legs growing steadier each day. On hot afternoons, Blake would sometimes return early from the range and take them down to the creek that ran through the southern part of the property. There, in a shady pool formed by a natural rock dam, they would swim and splash, Caleb shrieking with delight as Blake held him in the cool water. One such afternoon, as they sat on the bank letting the sun dry them, Blake watched Caleb playing with pebbles and said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Nora asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I'd like to legally adopt Caleb. Make him my son in the eyes of the law, not just in my heart." Nora looked up at him, surprised. "Can we do that?" "Judge Wilson says we can. I spoke to him last time I was in town. We'd need to file papers, make it official. Caleb would take my name." "Caleb Hollister," Nora said thoughtfully. "It sounds right. You don't mind him not carrying Mitchell anymore?" Nora considered this. "Thomas would want Caleb to have a father's name, a father who's here to raise him. I think he'd understand." Blake nodded, relieved. "There's something else," he said. "I want to set aside land for him. The northeast section, with the good water and that stand of cottonwoods. It'll be his when he's grown a legacy from both his fathers." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes at the thoughtfulness of this gesture. "You're a good man, Blake Hollister," she said, leaning up to kiss him. "Just trying to be worthy of what I've been given," he replied against her lips. Their kiss deepened until Caleb, feeling neglected, toddled over and inserted himself between them, demanding attention with his favorite word. "Bah, bah." Blake laughed and scooped him up. "Yes, little man, I'm right here. Always will be." As summer turned to fall, the ranch prospered. The cattle were fat, the harvest from Nora's garden plentiful. Blake hired 2 more hands to help with the increased workload, building a bunkhouse for them near the corrals. Caleb's vocabulary expanded rapidly. After ba came ma, then a flood of words that delighted and sometimes exasperated his parents. By his first birthday in June, he was stringing 2 and 3 words together, his favorite phrase being "ba, look," whenever he discovered something new. In October, Nora realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Blake, choosing a quiet evening when Caleb was already asleep. "Blake," she said as they sat before the fire, "do you remember on our wedding night when you said there might someday be another picture for my locket?" Blake looked up from his book, confused at first, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Nora, are you saying?" She nodded, her hands instinctively going to her still flat stomach. "The baby should come in early summer. June, I think." Blake's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He knelt before her chair, pressing his face against her middle, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Caleb will have a brother or sister," Nora said, running her fingers through Blake's hair. "Our family is growing." Blake looked up at her, his face radiant with joy. "Do you know how much I love you, how much I love both of you, all of you?" "I do know," Nora said softly, "because I love you just the same." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. As Nora's body changed, Blake became increasingly protective, taking over more of her chores and insisting she rest frequently. Nora indulged him to a point, but refused to be treated as an invalid. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he fretted about her working in the garden. "And most of them didn't have a devoted husband hovering over them like a mother hen." Blake had the grace to look sheepish. "I just want everything to be perfect for you and the baby." "It will be," Nora assured him, "because we're together." In April, Blake's protectiveness was temporarily diverted by a cattle drive to Silver Creek. With the new hands still learning the ranch's operations, Blake needed to lead the drive himself. He was reluctant to leave Nora, now 6 months pregnant, but she insisted she would be fine. "Miguel will stay close by," she said, "and Mrs. Henderson promised to check on me." "The baby isn't due for months yet. Go, do what needs to be done." Blake left with many backward glances, promising to return as quickly as possible. Nora waved until he was out of sight, then turned to Caleb, who at almost 2 years old was full of energy and mischief. "Well, little man," she said, lifting him into her arms with some difficulty, "it's just you and me for a while. What shall we do first?" The days without Blake were busy but lonely. Nora missed his presence in their bed, his deep voice reading stories in the evening, the way he always seemed to know when she needed help before she asked. Caleb missed him too, frequently asking where Ba, with a puzzled expression. "Papa will be home soon," Nora would reassure him. "He's bringing the cattle to town." On the 5th day after Blake's departure, Nora woke to the sound of riders approaching. Thinking Blake had returned early, she hurried to the window, Caleb trailing behind her in his nightshirt. Instead of Blake, she saw 3 rough-looking men dismounting in the yard. Something about their manner, the way they looked around furtively, the way they approached the house, sent a chill down her spine. "Miguel," she called, hoping the ranch hand was nearby, but there was no answer. One of the men pounded on the door. "Hello, the house. Anybody home?" Nora hesitated, then called out, "Who's there?" "What do you want?" "Just some travelers looking for a meal, madam," came the reply. "Your man around. My husband will be back any minute," Nora lied, her heart pounding. "He and our ranch hands." There was a pause, then low voices conferring. "Well, madam, we're mighty hungry. Maybe we could just wait for him inside. It's awful hot out here." Nora backed away from the door, lifting Caleb into her arms. "I'm sorry, but I can't let strangers in when my husband's away. There's a town 12 miles south with a good hotel." More muttering then. "We know your man's on a cattle drive, lady. We seen him in Silver Creek. Now open up before we break this door down." Panic surged through Nora. She looked around desperately for a weapon, but Blake had taken his rifle on the drive. There was a shotgun in their bedroom, but she'd never fired it. "Caleb," she whispered urgently, "we need to hide. Like a game. Can you be very quiet for Mama?" Caleb nodded, his eyes wide with confusion but sensing her fear. Nora carried him quickly to the back of the house, to the small storage room where Blake kept supplies. There was a trapdoor in the floor that led to a root cellar, a cool, dark space where they stored vegetables and preserves. Nora lifted the trapdoor and lowered Caleb down. "Stay here, my brave boy. Don't make a sound. Mama will come back for you very soon." "Mama, stay," Caleb whimpered, reaching for her. "I can't, sweetheart. I need to get the bad men to go away, but I'll be back, I promise." She closed the trapdoor just as she heard the front door splinter. Quickly, she made her way to the bedroom and grabbed the shotgun from the rack on the wall. It was heavy, awkward in her hands. She checked that it was loaded, the way Blake had shown her. The men were in the house now. She could hear them moving through the front rooms. "Come on out, lady," one called. "We ain't gonna hurt you if you cooperate. We just want valuables and food." Nora positioned herself in the hallway outside the bedroom, the shotgun raised. "I have a gun," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "And I know how to use it. Leave now and I won't shoot." Laughter greeted this declaration. "Hear that, boys? The little lady's gonna shoot us." A man appeared at the end of the hallway, tall, unshaven, with cold eyes that widened slightly at the sight of the shotgun in her hands. Then he smiled, revealing blackened teeth. "That's a big gun for such a small woman," he said. "Especially one in your condition." Nora realized with horror that he was looking at her pregnant belly. She tightened her grip on the shotgun. "I'm warning you, leave now." The man took a step forward. "I don't think you've ever fired that thing in your life, lady, so why don't you just—" Nora pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked her backward, the roar deafening in the confined space. She missed the man, but the shot tore a chunk out of the wall beside him. He dove for cover, cursing. "She's crazy," he shouted to his companions. "The bitch nearly took my head off." Nora struggled to her feet, her ears ringing. She needed to reload, but her hands were shaking too badly. Instead, she backed toward the storage room, determined to reach Caleb. One of the other men appeared, this one armed with a pistol. "Drop it, lady," he ordered. "Or I'll shoot you where you stand." Nora froze, the empty shotgun still in her hands. She was trapped with no way to protect herself or Caleb. Despair washed over her. Then, from outside, came the sound of rapid hoofbeats and shouting. The men froze, looking toward the front of the house. "What the hell?" the man with the pistol muttered. More shouting, then gunfire. The men in the house exchanged panicked glances. "It's a trap," one yelled. "Let's get out of here." They bolted for the back door, pushing past Nora so roughly that she fell again, striking her head against the wall. Dazed, she watched them flee, then heard more gunshots from outside. "Nora," Blake's voice frantic. "Nora, where are you?" "Here," she tried to call, but her voice was weak. "Blake, I'm here." Then he was there, kneeling beside her, his face white with fear. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "I'm all right," she managed. "Just shaken. Caleb, he's in the root cellar." Blake helped her sit up, checking her quickly for injuries. Finding none, he rushed to the storage room and lifted the trapdoor. Caleb's terrified wails filled the house as Blake lifted him out, holding him close and murmuring reassurances. With Caleb in one arm, Blake helped Nora to her feet with the other. "It's over," he said. "Miguel and I got 2 of them. The third ran off." "How did you know?" Nora asked, still dazed. "How did you get here in time?" "We finished the drive early and were heading back when we ran into a man in town who mentioned seeing some rough characters, asking questions about the ranch. Said they were especially interested when they heard I was away. Blake's jaw tightened. I knew something was wrong. We rode all night to get back. He led her to the sofa and gently settled her there, Caleb still clinging to him like a burr. When we saw their horses outside, I've never been so scared in my life, Nora. I hid Caleb, she said, needing him to know. I got him to safety first. Of course you did, Blake said, his voice breaking. You're the bravest woman I've ever known. Miguel appeared in the doorway, his face grim. All clear, boss. No sign of the third man. Must have lit out for the hills. Post a watch tonight anyway, Blake ordered. And tomorrow we start repairs on that door. After Miguel left, Blake sat beside Nora, Caleb nestled between them. I'm never leaving you alone again, he vowed. Never. You can't be here all the time, Nora said reasonably, though she was deeply shaken by the day's events. The ranch needs you. The ranch means nothing without you and Caleb. Blake put his arm around her, drawing her close. From now on, if I have to go to town or on a drive, you and Caleb come with me, or I'll leave enough men here to keep you safe. I won't take chances with my family. Family. The word warmed Nora despite her lingering fear. That's what they were, a family, bound by love if not entirely by blood. She rested her head on Blake's shoulder, feeling Caleb's small body relaxing against her as his fright ebbed. I love you, she whispered. Both of you. And we love you, Blake replied, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested on her rounded belly. All of you. In the weeks that followed, Blake was true to his word. He never left Nora and Caleb alone, even for a few hours. He hired more hands, men he knew personally and trusted. The house was fortified, stronger doors, shutters on the windows that could be barred from inside. Nora's pregnancy progressed without complications, despite the shock of the home invasion. As her due date approached, Blake insisted on bringing a midwife from town to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Calloway was elderly but spry, with decades of experience delivering babies in the territory. First babies often come late, she told Nora during one of their daily checks, but not always. Best to be prepared. As it happened, the baby had its own schedule. Nora woke one night in early June to sharp pains and a wet sensation. Blake, she gasped, shaking his shoulder. It's time. Blake was instantly alert. I'll get Mrs. Calloway. The birth was long and difficult. Nora labored through the night and into the following day, her strength flagging as the hours passed. Blake stayed with her, wiping her brow, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. You're the strongest person I know, he told her when she cried that she couldn't do it anymore. You can do this. Our baby needs you to be strong just a little longer. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their daughter was born tiny but perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire ranch. A girl, Mrs. Calloway announced, cleaning and wrapping the infant. A beautiful, healthy girl. Blake, who had never seen a birth before, stared in wonder as the midwife placed the baby in Nora's arms. She's so small, he whispered, touching a finger to his daughter's cheek. What will we call her? Nora asked, exhausted but radiant. Blake considered for a moment. What about Hope? Because that's what she represents to me. Hope for the future. A new beginning. Hope Hollister, Nora said, testing the name. It's perfect. Caleb was brought in to meet his sister a short while later. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes wide with curiosity. Baby? He asked, pointing at the bundle in Nora's arms. Yes, sweetheart. This is your sister, Hope. Can you say hello? Hello, Caleb said solemnly. Then, to everyone's surprise, he leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. Blake lifted him onto the bed so he could see better. You're a big brother now, Caleb. That means you'll help take care of Hope and protect her, just like I take care of you and your mama. Caleb nodded, seeming to understand the importance of this new role. "I be good brother," he promised. As Nora watched her husband and son leaning over her newborn daughter, she felt a completeness she had never expected to find again after Thomas's death. Life had taken such an unexpected turn, bringing her from grief to this moment of pure joy. The years that followed were good ones for the Hollister family. The ranch prospered, expanding as Blake purchased neighboring properties when they became available. Caleb grew into a sturdy, serious boy who worshipped his father and doted on his little sister. Hope, with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, was a bright, fearless child who could ride almost as soon as she could walk. When Caleb was 5, Blake officially adopted him, making a special trip to the territorial capital to file the papers. When they returned, there was a celebration at the ranch, with neighbors coming from miles around to share in the family's joy. During the festivities, Blake pulled Caleb aside for a private moment. "You know," he said carefully, "that you had another father before me. A good man who loved you very much." Caleb nodded. His mother had always been honest with him about Thomas. There was a photograph of him in the family Bible, and sometimes Nora would tell Caleb stories about his first father. "I know," Caleb said, "but you're my pa now." "That's right," Blake agreed, his throat tight with emotion. "And I always will be, but I want you to know that it's okay to remember your first father too, to be proud of being his son as well as mine." Caleb considered this, his young face serious. "Ma says he was brave." "He was," Blake confirmed, "very brave, and he would be so proud of the boy you're becoming." Caleb leaned against Blake's side, content with this assurance. "Can we go riding tomorrow, just you and me?" "Absolutely," Blake promised, ruffling the boy's hair. "First thing in the morning." That night after the children were asleep, Blake found Nora on the porch, gazing up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For giving me this life, this family. For trusting me with your heart and with Caleb." Nora turned in his arms to face him. "You earned that trust, Blake Hollister, every day in 1,000 ways." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming here with me that day?" "Never," Nora said firmly. "Not for a single moment." They stood together in the quiet night. The ranch spread out before them, the home they had built together from grief and hope and love. Inside, Caleb and Hope slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were deeply loved. And if Caleb sometimes dreamed of a father he couldn't quite remember, he always woke to the solid presence of the man who had promised to be his forever father, a promise kept through all the days of their lives together. Years passed, and the Hollister Ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Blake and Nora added 2 more children to their family, a son named Daniel, after Blake's brother, and another daughter they called Elizabeth, for Nora's mother. Caleb grew into a tall, thoughtful young man with his mother's gentle nature and his adoptive father's strength. By 18, he was Blake's right hand on the ranch, respected by the hands and neighboring ranchers alike. Hope, at 15, was the image of her mother, with a fierce independence that both worried and delighted her parents. The younger children, at 10 and 7, filled the ranch house with laughter and occasional chaos. On Caleb's 20th birthday, Blake took him up to the northeast section of the ranch, the land he had set aside years before. "This is yours now," Blake said, gesturing to the rolling grassland dotted with cottonwoods. "Has been since you were little, but I figured you're old enough now to decide what to do with it." Caleb surveyed the land with a keen eye. "It's good grazing, could support a fair-sized herd." "It could," Blake agreed. "Or it could be the site for a house if you were thinking of settling down someday," Caleb smiled. "You trying to marry me off, Pa?" "Not at all," Blake chuckled. Though I've noticed Abigail Carson making eyes at you at church." "Abby's sweet," Caleb admitted, a flush rising in his cheeks. "But I'm not ready for all that yet. I still have a lot to learn from you about running the ranch." Blake clapped him on the shoulder. "You know more than you think, but there's no rush. This land will be here when you're ready." They rode in companionable silence for a while, checking the condition of the grass and the water sources. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "Pa, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that, son?" "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to Ma? When you met her, I mean." Blake thought back to that day at the cemetery more than 19 years ago. "I asked if she was all right," he recalled. "She was standing there looking so lost with you in her arms." "Ma told me something once," Caleb said. "She said that when you offered to take us in, you told her, 'I'll be his first word and his forever father about me.'" Blake nodded slowly. "I did say something like that. Not right at first, but later when she was unsure about coming to the ranch. I wanted her to know I would care for you properly." "And you have," Caleb said simply. "Every day of my life you've been the father I needed. I just wanted you to know that I understand what you did for us, how you saved us both." Blake's eyes grew moist. "You've got it backwards, son. You and your mother saved me. I was just existing before you came along. You gave me a reason to truly live." They dismounted near a small stream, sitting on a fallen log while their horses drank. Blake reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box. "I've been waiting for the right time to give you this," he said, handing it to Caleb. "Today seems fitting." Caleb opened the box carefully. Inside was a pocket watch, silver, somewhat tarnished, with a length of chain attached. "It was your birth father's," Blake explained. "Your mother kept it all these years. We thought you should have it now." Caleb turned the watch over in his hands, running his thumb across the engraved initials, TM. "Thank you," he said softly. "This means a lot." "There's a photograph too," Blake continued, "inside the case. Your mother put it there before you were born." Caleb opened the watch to find a tiny daguerreotype of a young man with kind eyes and a serious expression. "He looks a little like me," he said, studying the image. "He does," Blake agreed. "He was a good man, your birth father, brave and determined. He'd be mighty proud of the man you've become." "Thanks to you," Caleb said, closing the watch carefully and tucking it into his vest pocket. "For raising me, for being my pa in all the ways that matter." They rode back to the ranch in time for the birthday celebration Nora had planned. The entire family gathered around the long table in the dining room, joined by some of the older hands who had watched Caleb grow up. There was a feast of Caleb's favorite foods, presents, and stories that had everyone laughing. As Nora brought out the cake she'd baked, decorated with 20 candles, she caught Blake's eye across the table. The look that passed between them held 2 decades of shared love and memories, the hard times they'd weathered together, the joy they'd found in their family, the life they'd built from an unexpected beginning. Later that night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Blake found Nora in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror. At 41, she was still beautiful to him, the silver threads in her dark hair only adding to her grace. "Did you give him the watch?" she asked, meeting his eyes in the reflection. "I did. He was moved by it." "Good." Nora set down her brush. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. He's a man now. He should have something of his birth father's." Blake came to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You raised a fine son, Nora. 4 fine children." "We raised them," Nora corrected, covering one of his hands with her own. "Together." Blake bent to kiss the top of her head. "Do you ever think about how it all began, that day at the cemetery?" "Often," Nora admitted. "I was so lost then. So afraid. I couldn't imagine how Caleb and I would survive. And now look at you. the heart of this family, the strongest woman I know." Nora turned to face him, her eyes soft with memory. "Do you remember what you said to me that day, about being Caleb's first word and his forever father?" "I remember," Blake said. "Biggest promise I ever made." "And you kept it," Nora said, rising to wrap her arms around his neck. "Every day for 20 years. "And I'll keep it for 20 more," Blake promised. "For as long as I live." Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods that had stood witness to their love story. Inside, the Hollister family slept peacefully, secure in bonds stronger than blood bonds forged in grief and hope, tested by hardship, and strengthened by love that had grown deeper with each passing year. For Blake and Nora, the journey that had begun with a chance meeting beside a lonely grave had led them to a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined. And for Caleb, the baby who had lost one father only to gain another, the promise made beside that grave had become the foundation of a life filled with love, purpose, and belonging. "I'll be his first word and his forever father," the cowboy had told the weeping widow all those years ago. And so he had become not by replacing what was lost, but by creating something new and equally precious. A family built on choice rather than chance, on commitment rather than obligation, on love that had room enough for memories of the past and dreams for the future. It was a promise kept through all the seasons of their lives together, through birth and growth, joy and sorrow, planting and harvest. A promise that would continue to shape their family for generations to come, long after the story of how it began had passed into family legend. And in the quiet of their bedroom, as Blake held Nora close, they both knew that of all the blessings life had given them, this was perhaps the greatest, that, from the depths of loss, they had found each other, and in finding each other, they had created a love story that would endure through all their days.